Chair, nearly 7 million households will be sent into fuel poverty as the energy unit price rises. And even within the support being provided by the government of capping unit prices to limit the average user bill to around 2,500. Of course, we know that the government support scheme is funded the wrong way, but I'm not here to make political points. 10,000 people a year could potentially die as a result of living in cold homes, it's estimated. This is a disgrace. Financial campaigner Martin Lewis raised the issue in relation to wondering whether warm banks or warm spaces will be needed for those who cannot afford to heat their homes, to follow food banks for those who cannot afford to eat. He has a very handy guide to setting up such space, which is called a warm welcome. Local authorities across the land have risen to the challenge and begun the process of setting up warm spaces for those affected. I've got a list of them, but I won't go through them all here now. But clearly, Chair, it is time for Harlow to step up too. And it is not without irony, Chair, that the organisations coming to the aid of those most seriously affected by energy prices skyrocketing are the very local authorities that have been ravaged by years of austerity and cuts. We know that in a civilised society, in our society, security support system should provide enough to support people to be able to pay their bills, but sadly it does not, Council. We know who is responsible, but this issue before us this evening is not about who's responsible, but what we choose to do about it. The use of public buildings to provide sanctuary to those unable to heat their homes is a logistical challenge, but one where the infrastructure is already in place, and what is needed to achieve it is time and negotiating how this will work. Our libraries, our community centres, our council buildings, our leisure facilities, our galleries, our museums, and as was mentioned at the previous cabinet meeting, our theatre as well. Now, of course, we recognise that night time presents more of a challenge, and clearly there were issues for people who are housebound, and there would be support needed to potentially provide support for them to get to those warm spaces. So I would request, obviously, further collaboration on this with the NHS, with local GPs and community health trusts, etc. We are perilously close to winter, Chair, and now is the time for us to act. This motion identifies some of the actions, and I recognise there is certainly need for many more. But very quickly, the Council will be using its own resources and through working closely with others ensure that easy access places are available where people can be warm and get advice and support through this winter. The Council will ensure that all residents are aware of what support is available by the end of this month at least. And the Council will write to the MP for Harlow, Robert Halford MP, and the appropriate Secretary of State to request additional government funding to enable the Council to address the fuel poverty and poverty issues strategically and practically within our town. Chair, this is not a problem of this Council's making, but this Council has a duty to support its residents, and I ask you all to support this motion so that we can continue to do what we can to support the residents of our great town. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Vince. Can I ask you to just formally move the motion?
Sorry, I formally move the motion.
And Councillor Edwards, can I ask you to formally second?
Formally second and reserve the right to speak.
I expected you to do so. Shall I throw that open to debate? Councillor Swords, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to propose an amendment to the motion.
Okay. Have you got copies of the amendment?
I believe after the meeting does.
Okay. Could they be distributed to all members, please?
No.
Well, I'd ask that Councillor Swords proposes it, and then perhaps if people feel that they need to recall from a short journal, I'll take that conversation with you then, Councillor Edwards. But I'd like to get it formally moved before we call any suspensions or anything. So, yes, if you could propose the amendment and speak to it, and then we'll take some views as to what we want to do to move forward. Okay?
Thank you, Chair. As I said, I'd like to formally propose an amendment to the motion, which is a very serious motion. There is no one of any political colour that would deny the cost of living pressures that people are facing across the country, but particularly in Harlow. And it is a more serious time than I've ever known in my lifetime. And I speak to some people who are considerably older than me, and they express the same concerns. And there are many points that are made in the motion which are eminently sensible, and that we would carry forward, of course, with write to the government about what more support could possibly be provided to Harlow households. But I just, at risk of avoiding politics, I believe in focusing on the world as it is and not as the world as you'd like it to be. This council cannot tackle the entirety of the cost of living challenge. It can only control the things it can control. That's not to say we can't do more. As the amendment sets out, we will go further. But the single biggest thing this council has control of, in terms of the cost of living pressures that we put on all households in this town, is our council tax level. That is the single biggest factor that we can control. And that is why I really take grievance with the sort of newfound sympathy from the opposition about the cost of living, because for the decade that they ran the council, they put council tax up at every single opportunity they had. So when you talk about cost of living and the pressures you're putting on people and what we can do to possibly help with that, I can assure you that putting a letter through every door in the house saying we're putting up the council tax won't be helping. So when you talk about and I'm not denying that you care passionately about it, but actions are louder than words. And particularly as the amendment notes, this council this year delivered the biggest council tax cut in UK history. The biggest. To 34,000 homes in Harlow, it was worth over £200. We cancelled the planned council tax increase that you had scheduled. We gave a £50 council tax rebate to all homes in Harlow because we thought that you'd unfairly collected their council tax and it wasn't being used in the correct way. On top of that, the government put forward £150 council tax rebate. And when that package came to this council, and the people in this chamber had the opportunity to do something directly about the cost of living, you voted against it. You put forward an alternative budget to put council tax up. So that is why I think it's very important that this amendment and this motion notes that yes, there is a lot more to do, but this council delivered the biggest council tax cut in UK history, and I think that's well worth noting. And the second point I'd just like to stress, Chair, about the amendment is that, as I said, there are measures in the proposed motion which are important, and we will, go forward with and take forward. But again, in a few months' time, this council will be setting its budget, and when it sets its budget, we will have the chance to take a decision as to whether we send letters to people's homes saying we are putting up your council tax or we are not. And as the amendment sets out there, Chair, I think that this motion tonight should make very clear the ambition of everyone in this chamber to do everything possible to keep the council tax as low as we possibly can. So I look forward, as the amendment there sets out, to ease the cost of living through the council tax system as far as we possibly can. And I presume, by the premise of the motion, there'll be cross-party support for our budget this year when we do everything we possibly can to ease the cost of living burden. And I would just say to the opposition, that is simply the choice you have. You have the choice whether to put up people's council tax or not.
Thank you, Councillor Swords. Before I proceed, Councillor Edwards, it's not helpful to have you shouting time in the middle of people's speeches or speaking loudly the word time. The officers have a clock and they use on everyone's speeches, and they do so without fear or favour of different sides of the chamber. I'll set to the alarm rather than your call of time, sir. Now, Councillor Swords, you formally moved that. Do you have a second?
I reserve my rights.
You may indeed. Now, Councillor Edwards, back to you. Before we got that proposal on the table, I think you were drawing my attention to the 13J of the Constitutional Rules of Debate to temporarily adjourn the meeting. Is that something that you want to move in? And what time would you like to adjourn the meeting for? Can I take then a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Durkin. All those in favour of a short adjournment of 10 minutes to allow people to read this? That looks to be unanimous. I call this meeting adjourned for 10 minutes. Thank you. No? In which case, Councillor Green, do you wish to offer your seconding speech to the amendment?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Swords for bringing this amendment to us. I'd like to thank the opposition for bringing this motion to us as well, because it touches upon a very, very important issue, which is the cost of living, which this administration, it seems the council at large, takes very seriously indeed. The issue that we had primarily with this particular motion was not the items that are in it, that's why we've kept them in, but as we felt we didn't go far enough. If we're going to move a motion, we want to make sure that we can do everything we can as a council to make sure that we're supporting our residents through the cost of living crisis. And Councillor Sort is right. We have to look at the direct action that we can take as well. And that's why I think recognising not only the council tax support that this council has done, because I believe that showed that we had taken the strong strategic leadership which Councillor Vince acknowledges other councils have taken, but I think it's important that we acknowledge the strong leadership on this that we've done. We set the trend across the country. We were the first people to do it, and I do remember taking a lot of heat and flack from the opposition at the time, whether I would or not, whether I would or would not actually go through with the biggest council tax cut this council certainly put through, and last year was the largest in passed throughout the country. So I think that's really, really important, and we should do everything we possibly can to try and do that again, and hence why we say in here, take all possible measures in next year's budget setting process, as we did this year, to ease the cost of living through the council tax system, and therefore the budget will receive cross-party support, because we think that if everyone's really serious about bearing down on the cost of living, it takes every single person to take action where they can. Yep. We can, so we should. We don't speak for other authorities, we don't speak for other institutions, we speak for this one, and that's why it's very important to make that point here, which is what we've done. And yes, of course, we will continue to work with other authorities, as we've mentioned before, and we'll work with Essex, who are providing today a plan on how they are also going to support residents through the winter. And we think it's really important that the new amended motion takes into account the work that officers and this council are already doing in terms of working with partners to make sure that we do provide those warm spaces where we can, and that we are seeking that additional funding to try and extend that. And we felt we realised what the aim and ambition of the original motion was, but we felt it overlooked the good work that council officers are already doing, and so we felt that was really important just to amend that. So really, it remains for me to say that we certainly do recognise the cost of living crisis on this side. We're glad that the opposition recognise the cost of living crisis, and hopefully we can all work together as one council to support our residents and actually bear down on the cost of living crisis in all of its forms, wherever we can, with whatever means and power and levers we have at our disposal. And I tell you now, council tax is one of those big levers that we do have at our disposal. And so I really, really would welcome the opposition joining us in supporting that aim and ambition. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. There being no other speakers identified, I'm going to invoke section 16.9b of our rules of procedures. If an amendment is moved, the mover of the original motion has the right to reply at the close of the debate. Councillor Vince, I turn to you.
Thank you, Chair. And we saw some warm words from the party opposite about the importance of working together and the importance of partnership. If, Chair, the administration were truly keen on cross-party working and partnership on this particular issue, and I recognise the importance of the issue and the work that the wonderful Harlow council officers have done throughout this difficult period. They may have decided perhaps to give us their amendment before the meeting actually started. We've had this issue before, Chair, and I raised it at the time, and I was assured by the mover of this particular amendment that he would ensure that this came to me in advance. This motion we put in last week, Chair, the amendment has come to me today. For that, and other reasons that I'll alleviate to in a moment, we clearly reject this amendment. We brought this motion here as a vision to help people in Harlow through a very difficult time. I avoided too much party politics. Unfortunately, the person opposite didn't manage that. We don't know what the financial situation of this council will be by next February. What we do know is this party opposite have overspent on last year's budget by £1.2 million. We also know, Chair, that over the last 12 years, this administration has suffered from 70% cuts from their own government. They've had criticisms about us raising council tax in the past over the last 7 years. I didn't realise there was a cost of living crisis 7 years ago, although I appreciate that the Tories in charge, it does feel a bit like that. And finally, Chair, let me just say this. You know, we are not going to make a commitment on what's going to happen in the budget next year. We as a group, as an opposition group, will present our alternative budget, a budget that is fair and a budget that makes a difference for the most vulnerable people in our town, because that's the people that this party represent. So, Chair, we reject this motion for a number of reasons, but frankly, Chair, and I'll say it again, I'll say to Pios and I'll say to Jen Knox, who thinks it's funny, that basically, if you give me an amendment in a meeting, I'm going to reject it. It's ridiculous. Thank you, Chair.
There are no more speakers on this. I'll move to the vote on the amendment. Can I see those members in favour, please? And thank you. Can I see those members against?
I meant 13-12. That's 14-12.
So at a vote of 14 to 12, the amendment is passed and now becomes the substantive motion. We return to the debate on the substantive motion. Do I have any speakers? Councillor Edwards.
I find this so sad. The original motion, when it was put forward in a politically neutral way. It was written in a politically neutral way. It was written in a way which will enable us all as a council and councillors, to come together to actually agree something for the people of this town. And it's been subverted, and it's been subverted for political reasons. In terms of that subversion, what amazed me in some respects was the blatantcy of it. Talked about working together, and then proceeded for the first full 4 minutes of his opening speech, Councillor Swords, and his opening speech to actually sort of criticise the last administration. And then also expect us to sign up to his budget. That's what he was expecting to do. When we all know that in 2 weeks' time, there's going to be a government statement which is likely to lay out huge amounts of cuts to public services and huge amount of both tax increases and cuts. It's all been signalled all the way through. So how on earth can we be expected to sign up to whatever it is you're proposing as a budget now, to be saying we'll do that as a cross-party basis? We want to wait and see exactly what it is you're proposing before we go anywhere near what you'd be suggesting as a budget. To move back to the original, what we were trying to say is, well, we're recognising the sort of situation as far as this town is concerned, with some of the most deprived wards in Essex. We were recognising how the cost of living crisis is hitting people hard in Harlow. And we were also recognising that winter was literally weeks away. When this motion was written, which was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I went on the Harlow Council website to see what advice was being given about warm spaces. There was nothing in there. I went on the County Council site to see what they were advising with regard to warm spaces. There was nothing in there. The County Council only put out the fact that they were prepared to put £100,000 across Essex were £1,000 per organisation, so that's effectively 100 schemes across Essex. They only announced that on the 21st of October. So when I then spoke to some, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to members of church groups to say, are you doing anything? Have you heard anything in terms of grants about what's happening as far as warm spaces is concerned? There was nothing. There was nothing from the voluntary sector. So that was the reason this motion was put there. I then went I then Googled to see what other organisations were doing and other councils were doing. And they were streets ahead of us. I tried to be politically neutral. I looked at Sevenoaks in Kent. I looked at Worthing. I looked at Bedford. And they were already streets ahead of us. They already had a list of organisations that were going to provide warm spaces. They were already publicising the £1,000 grant. They were already, one of them had already come up with a charter for warm spaces, which talked about dignity, talked about feeling safe, talked about respecting people and ensuring that there was no inappropriate behaviour. So we already have examples across the country of what other councils are doing. And hence that was the reason why we put in the statement about the strong strategic lead that other councils were doing. So we then thought, right, well, what can this council do? Now I know, let's take the politics out of it. I know that there is some work being done now about the playhouse, the possibility of using the playhouse. And of course we welcome that. I also understand that today there was a meeting with Rainbow Services and what have you, looking at now saying, well, okay, what can also be done across the town? And of course I welcome that. But we need to make certain that people in Harlow are aware of what's going to be done.
Sorry, would you have 30 seconds?
Okay, 30 seconds. So I had hoped that for once we as a council could truly, political cross-party way, could have addressed this issue. But instead of that, what we got was politicking from the other side, and because of that, we cannot go near this motion as it now stands. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to take part in the debate? I see. Who is that at the back there? Sorry, my vision's Councillor Morrison.
Councillor Kay Morrison.
Well, there's only one Councillor Morrison in this direction, so...
Okay, sorry about that.
So, Councillor Morrison, please feel free to speak.
Thank you very much. I too am very disappointed and quite surprised. I really am. You may be interested to know that the United Nations Poverty Envoy has been investigating various countries in the world, including Nepal, Lebanon, and Kyrgyzstan. So I have a feeling he may well know what he's talking about. He has commented on the UK's cost of living crisis, advising our government to raise taxes on the rich and on large corporations, on those who can afford it. We know here in Harlow that families and individuals have been struggling for quite a while to pay the bills, struggling to make the hard choices. Eat or heat. It's a whole lot worse now. Now that energy bills and every other bill have skyrocketed. We need to do more. Now, not next year, not some other time. Now, this year. Children cannot learn when their stomachs are empty. Food banks are struggling to meet demand. This is the United Kingdom. Over the last 12 years or so, give or take, Harlow Council has suffered huge cuts in government funding. I recognise that, I understand that. And this evening we have heard from some of the administration, at least one member of the administration, about the effects on budgets and budgeting. Just the same, we have to find ways to help people to stay warm. We have to help give them shelter this year, this winter, not some other winter, some other year. Yesterday, a Bushfair resident with a great deal of business experience told me that he's really worried now. He had been considering opening another small business, but he won't do that now because, and I quote, these are his words, "It's all so bleak. The economy, the future are in such a mess that I dare not take the risk." And he's not alone. I know that other businesses, especially small businesses in Harlow, are certainly struggling. And those businesses and those organisations in Harlow want to help our residents. Of course they do. We need more certainty. Harlow people need a bit of help now. Couldn't we give them just a wee bit of comfort? Not just words about some other time, some other year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Do I see any other contributors? Councillor Dirk.
Thank you. Before I start, no one's actually mentioned it, but I think the council should send its congratulations to our MP who has just been promoted into the Tory cabinet, and hopefully that will also show that at times we can agree on a political basis. If we hadn't brought this motion tonight, what would you have done? You would have done nothing. You wouldn't have done a single thing about it. And that's a shameful situation. It is absolutely shameful that this society in this year is having to even contemplate doing this. It is absolutely shocking that what we're trying to do is put sticking plasters over a gaping wound about the breakdown of our community and our breakdown of our society and the very essence of our economy and our business. And why has that happened? Well, the people can blame Ukraine, they can blame Putin, they can blame everything. But actually what we need to do is reflect on our own responsibilities as a government, as a society, and as a council over these two issues. I would have hoped that tonight the leader of this council would have taken the unique opportunity of saying that he is going to give so much money from the reserves to enable our officers to work with our colleagues, both in the public, charity and private sector, to come together to put a plan together. All we've heard so far is someone else's, because the county council have offered approximately £1,000 per charity or organisation. But we need to do more than that. We need to be more creative. We need to be more flexible. We actually need to be more deliverable and believable in these particular issues. And I know people will think this is frivolous, but it's not about the playhouse, because the playhouse is in the centre of the town, that's fine. But you've got to get there. There are no buses to get you there. You can drive your car, but you can't afford the petrol to get there. And what are you going to do during the day? It needs to have a holistic approach that is actually, I won't say 24/7, but certainly day and night, that we can afford and we can appropriate help people. Young people, elderly people, vulnerable people. We've got to find areas in our local community that can facilitate that and support. And I know the colleagues opposite will probably think it's quite frivolous, but each area has got its own public house. Public houses are open, public houses are empty, but actually we could be going to the publicans and saying, could we do something with you? Perhaps put tea and coffee on, or a soft drink. I know I'm not advocating alcohol at any way, shape or form, but it's a win-win because it helps the business and it actually helps our community, and it's in the heart and the home of our community. But of course, yes, the county council doesn't allow that, because it only will allow charities and organisations in our private sector. But we could, if we had a true leadership team there that would recognise and respond to something now, we could make that difference to our people and our society. So I am sad that this has been meddled with. And I'm really sad that people have tried to make this as some sort of political point. And I'm really sad, but not surprised, that actually what your party has done is try to lock the Labour administration in to a zero tax next year, when they know, we do not know what the budget is going to be, what the changes, what the cutbacks are going to be. But please, even though we won't be supporting this motion, we won't be voting against it, but we won't be supporting it, I do hope the politics can be put to one side and we can get together and we can do what we did with COVID, is find the right answers. But part of that is this administration being brave enough to put their hand in the pocket, go to the reserves and tell us what they are prepared to give us to support our community. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Durkin. I see Councillor Swords is indicated, and then I've got Councillor Perrin and Councillor Sips.
Thank you, Chair. I may just start on the...
No, Councillor Swords spoke to move an amendment.
Yeah.
He has not yet spoken on the substantive motion.
I'll start with the point that we just finished with about reserves. I'll draw the Council's attention to the wording of the original motion that they put forward, and it says, this Council will, followed by a series of actions. So I would have thought perhaps if he wanted the Council to dip into the reserves and provide funding, which is an action, he would have listed it as an action in the motion he put forward, didn't he? But he didn't.
You can, by use of its own resources.
Yeah. If I just again draw their attention to the motion, and we've just heard that they won't be voting for it. Of course, if they don't vote for it, they won't be voting for the measures that we put forward, that is open-ending, which I'm sure the leader will cover, that's listed in the many other things that we're going to be doing. I really do not understand where the politics came into this. I don't understand when politics came into it. We didn't take anything out of their
Look
motion.
on the replay on your Harlow.
Councillor Edwards, please.
We didn't take anything out of their motion. The only thing we added in terms of action, and I quote, sorry, there were two things we added in terms of action. The first was quite a minor one, in that the original motion wanted to ensure that residents were aware of support at the end of November. We said that we'd do it as soon as possible, because that's obviously nearer than the end of November, which I thought they would have welcomed. And the second was, and I quote, take all possible measures in next year's budget setting process to ease the cost of living. Where is the politics in that? I thought this motion was about the cost of living, and Councillor Durkin mentioned very, very eloquently, dare I say, that we should focus on what this council can do. So this council can take all possible measures to ease the cost of living, and yet they won't vote for it. They won't vote to take all possible measures to ease the cost of living. Now, that's not binding you into anything. That's simply saying you are committed to taking all possible measures. So if you're not going to vote for it, I can only presume you're not committed to taking all possible measures in the budget next year. That is all it says. It simply said to ease the cost of living through the council tax system. You're not bound by anything. You're just doing whatever is possible there. So I really do, I just don't understand where the sort of mythical angst about politics has come into it, because that is the only two amendments we've added to the action this council will take. But pardon the pun, Councillor Vince mentioned warm words. So you bring a motion about the cost of living. We say we'll do everything we possibly can in the budget next year to ease the cost of living, and you won't vote for it. Well, speechless. Never am I, but I am this evening. So,
Results.
But yet again, all we get is sort of chuckling about the fact they won't support measures on the cost of living. So I really don't have anything more to add, Chair, except I really do hope that the opposition will see the wood from the trees and simply vote to take all the measures we possibly can to course, Chair, if they're not willing to vote for that tonight, they simply put on record that they don't want to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Swords. Councillor Perrin.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to echo many of the points that Councillor Swords has just made. And let's go to some other points. We're talking about having turned this into a party political bashing. Well, the only party political bashing I've heard are pre-prepared statements all about the cost of living crisis and whose fault it is. We've not assigned any blame to the cost of living crisis. All we've heard is the blame come from that side. All we've said is we will take all possible measures to support the people of this town. And what we did do as well, above and beyond the actions, is we supported our own council officers. So here we have the original motion saying the strong strategic lead other councils across the country are providing. All we did was change it to the strong strategic lead Harlow and other councils are providing. Because we feel it's really important that we acknowledge the hard work and lead that we are taking on many of the issues that affect our residents. Ensure that all residents are aware, and we wanted to make sure that we continue to work with our council's community services. Because we think it's really important that we emphasise that there are voluntary sectors, there are faith groups, there are people in this town that are already working with our council officers, and if we don't acknowledge that, then we are not really regarding the work that they're doing off their own bat. We heard, what would we have done had this council, had the opposition not brought this motion to us tonight, as if we're not doing anything? Well, they talk about being an open and listening opposition. Well, they've not listened to the answers that were clearly given well ahead of time of this meeting. We're already doing a number of things to actively promote and address the issues you mentioned around cost of living. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things just listed in one question. So the council is working very closely with health colleagues across the West Essex Health Inequalities workstream on the impacts of cost of living crisis and available support for residents. This is a cross-sector issue. The council is one of the bodies looking to address the issue locally, and we've worked with the NHS and the county council, as well as other advice groups and voluntary sectors. So we're doing that. These are things we're actually doing. The Community Hub, coordinated by Rainbow Services, provides face-to-face advice and information for outreach sessions to the community and referrals to services that can offer direct support, such as the food bank, local citizens advice bureau, etc., and is funded by Harlow Council. The council's webpage is dedicated to the cost of living support, and they're signposting these to landing pages and cover a number of key questions that the residents ask for, help with the cost of living. This covers not only financial help from the council and others, but also information on health and well-being, support for older residents, and free and low-cost activities. Again, this is a source of information that can be used by frontline services to direct people to where they can find assistance. We're doing that now. Regular cost of living information is featured in Harlow Times since the summer. So it's not about yesterday, we're doing it now. Okay? We've got a social media campaign that's being developed as we go on about Harlow and what can be done. Regular information is also circulated to places around the town to help those that cannot reach online. So we're doing more in the conventional analogue space as well. Contact Harlow provides advice and information on a variety of services and site host residents and other support. And there's been a report to the Scrutiny Committee on the 16th, which includes recommendations to review locations and contents of community supports, etc., etc. So already doing an awful lot there as well, but we acknowledge we can do more, and that is why we supported the substantive, but we needed to recognise those things, because otherwise what we're saying is we're not going to carry on doing them, and we think it's really important that we do. And we think it's really important that we address the cost of living through the council tax system. And as Councillor Saw says, it does not bind you over, because it says take all possible measures in next year's budget setting process. Take all possible measures. If you're not going to try, you won't get there. But they have some sort of ideological dogma that you cannot support people by reducing their council tax bill. Some of the lowest paid people in society cannot be helped by having their council tax bill reduced. That seems absolutely ridiculous to me, and why wouldn't you do that? But of course, they don't want to really talk about the real issues. They want to divert. They want to talk about bashing everybody else, and they want to talk about bashing the Conservatives. And we haven't bashed anyone We just agreed with them and we said we need to acknowledge what's being done here and we want to go further. So I put it back to you. We can spend all night talking about who said what, he, she says this and that. But actually, what matters is that we actually continue to do these things. And by voting against them, all the things that you wanted to do, you're saying you're not going to do them. That is absolutely totally bizarre. Chair, I think our newly amended motion goes further, and I'm really, really sad that the opposition felt they were unable to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Hammond. The only other member I see indicating is Councillor Sills.
Thank you, Chair. So just wanted to point out, in agreement, Councillor Durkin talked about a holistic approach, and Councillor Morrison talked about creativity and flexibility, and Councillor Vince spoke about his disappointment in terms of the amendment. I think the most important thing as an individual, not just a councillor, but as a resident of Harlow, somebody who understands hardship, understands struggle, understands owning a small business and making it work. I do feel that, in terms of warm spaces, because I spend time, personal time, in going into faith groups and communities and seeing how we can help people. And food banks do work, however, it's not enough, as you stated, Councillor Morrison, that we have to do more. In doing more is not, increased in terms of giving out money, but it's creating resilience in people and individuals to be able to withstand what's coming. Because if we're all realistic, we are going to have some cuts because the government might not be able to afford a lot of things which we'd like collectively to give our local residents. For Harlow, not more so for those who are not in Harlow, in focusing on our residents, I feel we again have to stop making everything being so political. Sitting here listening to leaseholders in different committees and all their different needs, they might not be able to fall under a bracket of maybe those who might be in receipt of benefits and help. But I'm sure for most of our residents in Harlow who may benefit from cuts from the council tax, that little cut as well will help them pay their mortgages and rents and bills that might not happen for them. And I do feel, if we are going to say we need to do more and not sticking plasters on situations and things, we need to do more by working together, and working together has been realistic. In throwing money into, I look at and I assess and I look at charities who are providing support, it's not enough. Come down to Potter Street on a Wednesday, you see vulnerable people there, disabled people who have no work, but yet these local communities are supporting local individuals. So if we are going to stop being political, maybe we can all start in our own rules, talking to our members, working with our members and committing our time with them.
Thank you, Councillor Sills. Councillor Garnett, you're indicating.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't going to say anything, but I feel I need to. What is wrong with them over there? They're so used to putting council tax up, they don't comprehend that you can reduce it, and people benefit by reducing it. So what you're trying to say is, we won't vote for this, for our amendment, because we want to leave the door open, because we want to put it up again, if ever we get into power. Well, hopefully the residents of Harlow will see straight through you, and know that the only way you go is putting it up.
Thank you, councillors. There being no further people indicating, 16.9A points us to the mover of the original motion having a right to reply at the end of the debate. Councillor Vince, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Since you, the leader of the council, said he wasn't doing his badge, I put my badge. I think just to comment on the previous comment about council tax, the leader of the council was correctly on Dave Muncho last year, when he commented, or this year in fact, when he made a sweeping statement about what this administration intends to do when it comes to council tax. Actually, we want to do the best that we can to support residents in our town, but we're not going to today have our hand forced by administration who are ultimately just literally point scoring. I don't blame them, I'm trying to track from everything anything else is going on, I was them as well. But look, enough of that. The cost of living crisis isn't going away, and people across Harlow are going to face a challenging winter. And look, well done. If you're really pleased yourself, you've created a record and then you've done member, well done. But I would genuinely ask, in all seriousness, I'd genuinely ask, the last council spokesman made some really valid points, and she referred back to some of the points made by some of the council on this side. I'm sure some of the council on the other side have made comments similar as well. Councillor Durkin particularly made some really useful and practical suggestions as to what we can do to support people in our town. And I would really ask, councils opposite and councils to take and, really listen to some of the suggestions that have been made by our party, because actually, ultimately, it's not about playing politics in the chamber, it's about what we do in our communities. And actually, there are some real sensible solutions coming forward, particularly from Councillor Morrison and Councillor Durkin, about how we can actually deal with that issue. So, the political points were aside, and the debate, whatever you want to call it, we please make sure that we do take on board many really important ideas that we can actually take forward to support our town. Councillor Durkin is right. It is an absolute disgrace that in the 21st century, we have people queuing around the corner to use food banks. I walk past St Paul's every Thursday, and it's just a sense of shock for me that that's the case. And I do feel a sense of shame, and I'm not conservative, but no, I do feel a sense of shame in the fact that we are living in a society where people still rely on food banks. It's absolutely a sense of shame that we live in a society where people are going to rely on all spaces because they can't afford to eat for their homes. And actually, we all have responsibilities as politicians, as elected officials, as community leaders to do something about that. And politics aside, let's all make sure that we do that. I'm certainly know that my group is committed to that. I think that probably the products probably are too in a different way. And let's actually genuinely work together. Let's try and tackle the issues and protect and support the most vulnerable residents in our town.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. There being no other contributions, shall we put this to the vote?
Mr Chairman, I'd like to go for a recorded vote if possible.
You need 5 members standing with you to do that. Here's you have that. I'll hand over to the legal officer for a recorded vote, please.
To remind members that you can either vote for, against or abstain in voting. Call the members in order. Councillor David Carter.
For.
Councillor Simon Carter.
For.
Councillor Jean Clark.
Abstain.
Councillor Bob Davis.
Against.
Councillor Joe Dunn.
Abstain.
Councillor Tony Durkin.
Abstain.
Councillor Tony Edwards.
Abstain.
Councillor Mike Garnett.
For.
Councillor James Griggs.
Abstain.
Councillor Michael Hardware.
For.
Councillor Andrew Johnson.
As is traditional for the chair of the meeting, I will be abstaining.
Councillor Steve LeMay.
For.
Councillor James Leppard.
For.
Councillor Sue Livings.
For.
Councillor Ash Malik.
For.
Councillor Kay Morrison.
Abstain.
Councillor Colleen Morrison. For, against or abstain? For. Councillor Russell Perry.
For.
Councillor Diana. Councillor Pritchard. Put me tick back in. Councillor Matthew Saggers.
For.
Councillor Clive Souter. Councillor Stacey Seals. Councillor Lainey Shears. Councillor John Strachan.
Abstain.
Councillor Dan Swords.
For.
Councillor Chris Vince. Councillor Nancy Watson. 14 voted for, 1 against, 12